All right, so here's our agenda. Just a little overview of what we're going to be talking about. It's going to be divided up in kind of a couple general sections here. So we have a couple of items that we need to look at before you end up closing the year. That's kind of these first 2 bullet points here. We have just a year-end checklist of tasks that you're going to need to perform before closing, as well as some managerial reports that you're going to want to run at year-end and tie out to your GL. Then we're going to get into actual closing, which is really twofold. You're going to close your period as well as the year itself. So as you'll see in a few minutes, when it comes to closing your last period, there isn't really too much different than what you guys do from a normal process. I'm assuming, we kind of have a range of customers here, some of whom have been on X3 for a brief period of time, some for years. So I'll try and keep this a little bit high level here so we kind of make sure we cover, make this appropriate for all people on the phone. Then some things to consider for after the period's closed and some other processes to run. You're going to want to run your financial data extraction and your SEI reports, just to kind of make sure everything ties out. We also have other considerations we're going to discuss, and really it's kind of like your annual maintenance type of items that you want to do at year end. We're going to briefly touch on 1099s. Then we're going to talk about just some parameters that you're going to want to update at year end, as just part of your process. Okay, so we're going to get into our checklist here. So we have a couple of different areas that we're going to touch on. First, we're going to talk about operational transactions. Then we're going to talk a little bit about our financial. It's kind of a common theme of things that we're going to go over here is that, we're going to be ensuring that all of our processes have been completed, which in EM speak, that means we're going to be finalizing, validating, posting various transactions. So doing so is necessary, not only make sure your books are correct, but also is necessary for EM to allow you to actually close the period. So if you have various transactions that are in semi-complete states, that will prevent X3 from actually closing. All right, so kind of getting into the meat of it here. So what you're going to want to make sure that you have done is that all of your receipts and deliveries are validated and that they're invoiced, right? So again, probably a lot of this is not any different than your normal monthly process for those of you that are old hat at your month-end close. In addition, you're going to make sure all your sales invoices and credit memos are posted. I put the functions up here on the screen for you to see, should that be useful to you. Same is true of your purchase invoices and your credit memos. So a couple things to note when we're talking about finalizing and posting all of these. There's a few different ways that you can go about making sure that those are done en masse. So if you wanted to, there are reports that exist within X3. If you just go under reports, and just search for the word contains not in the description, you're likely to find some that will be, that will be useful for you. That is one way that you can do it. Another way that you can find these unposted transactions is you can use the advanced selection within various functions, and then just make sure you're looking for unposted or unvalidated or whatever is appropriate at that time. In addition to that, you can do it kind of the old-fashioned way, which some of you may do this. When you're in the invoices to begin with, you may just post them one by one, in real time as you go through. So you certainly can do that. You can go back and post them, look for anywhere that post button isn't grayed out and hit that button. Or in a lot of these different functions within X3, you have, and this is kind of the preferred method, so it's save the best for last on this one. You can run a function in these respective modules that will allow you to post either many or all of them at once. So for example, under sales invoices, there's a credit memo validation button, and that means posting. And that'll have a little pop-up screen that will let you choose various criteria. And you guys might have seen that before. So for example, you can do all users, just a specific user. You can do it by a site at a time. You can do it by a document range. Or you can just leave it wide open and just post, everything at once if that's what you so choose. So just so you know, that's available to you in most of these functions. And again, I won't drill into where they are in each of these areas, but just know that they're there. They usually are in the place where the invoices are entered as well. So just take a look. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to one of us at any time. All right. So next thing that you're going to concern yourself with is, of course, make sure all of your make sure all your payments are posted with your bank transactions. So both your payments and deposits, make sure those are brought through to completion. The next thing on here is execute the dimension balance recovery function. So that's one of those things that periodically is just good to do, especially if you're relatively new to X3, so especially this year. So what could potentially happen is the tables just get out of whack within X3. It doesn't happen often, but the potential exists for you to do it. So if you run this utility, it's under financials utilities, and it's called dimensional balances QTY. And it just resyncs those tables and just makes sure that the balances that are tied to your dimensions tie to your GL as well. So again, if you do run that and you don't need to, it won't do any harm. And for those of you who aren't using dimensions at all, then obviously that won't apply to you, which kind of as a side note, back up something I should have said in the introduction. So some of these steps aren't going to apply to everybody, right? For example, not everyone will have a subcontract that we're about to talk about in a second and things like that. So, it's kind of things that don't apply to your business, you can kind of ignore those for your to-do list. All right, so getting back into it. So the next step that we're going to do is just make sure that you do your physical inventories for the year. So make sure that they're complete and make sure that you close out all of your sessions. That way the journals are ready to post once your stock accounting interface runs. So again, if that's not done, that causes issues. All right, so from a subcontracting, just make sure that your costs are calculated and posting within there. And then, so your stock accounting interface and your WIP accounting interface, just depending on how you guys have things set up, you may have those as recurring tasks. And hopefully you guys have some familiarity with those. And basically, those are just things that you kind of set it and forget it in the background, and they just run however often it was set up. For stock accounting interface, for example, it might be set up to run every hour, every 12 hours, every day, what have you. So you probably don't think about, for those of you who have that, you probably don't think about these terribly often. But come year end, probably this is a good thing to do on a month end basis. But since certainly at year end you need to do these, run it manually. And here are the functions up on the screen here as well. And what that'll do is just in case any transactions are stuck and error out that you don't see from your automatic process that runs in the background, it'll just kind of flush those out. And some things that often bring them, cause issues, you just might have like a slight rounding issue. So not necessarily anything major, but just a little hiccup that's gonna, cause X3 some trouble when you go to close the year. Okay. All right, so that's kind of it for what we want to talk about with our operational transactions. Gonna kind of move into our next slide here. And we're going to talk about our financial accounting processes. So, pardon me. So what we're going to want to do is just, again, nothing out of the ordinary here. You're going to enter in your accrual entries as well as generate their reversals. So your reversals, as you guys may know, is something that you guys can execute one at a time. Or if you go under financials, current processes, processings, I think it is actually, there is a function that will reverse all of those for the month end math. So just make sure, run that, as well as all of your recurring entries. All right, and again, there's a function for that as well. So with your depreciation, you're going to need to, assuming that that's not set up as a recurring task for you, or if you're not using fixed assets, make sure you just do that entry as well. Make sure that you confirm all of your intercompany account balances. So just make sure that your due tos match your to froms between your companies and all that. Make sure everything's all buttoned up there. Next thing you're going to want to check is just check your variances, your various variance accounts, your clearing accounts, your R&I, your S&I, and then your 999 is your suspense account. And you just want to make sure that when you review those accounts, just make sure they make sense. And to the extent that it's necessary, that now's a good time to clean those up via a journal or what have you. You also might, whenever something seems out of whack, so especially if things are hitting the 999999 account or however many digits you guys have in your chart of accounts, you might want to make a note of that. And the reason why is there's likely an accounting code in the background that can be updated that will prevent that from hitting that account in the future. So if you're using that in the normal fashion, that's kind of the catch-all where transactions that don't have a known home end up in that account. Next thing you're going to want to do is run your invoices to receive process. So you manage stock from a PO post to the expense in the R&I account properly. So for your non-inventory items, there's no entry that occurs at the receipt of those. It has to go to the invoice. So to help you in this effort, you can run a process under financials, closing procedures, invoice receivables, and that function is FUNPTH. And that'll be a little dialog box for you to make some various criteria choices. You want to make sure that over on the right, there's a non-managed radio button that you need to check. In addition, you can reverse that if you want to. So there's a reversal date in the bottom right corner for that. On to our next step then. You're going to want to go through the automatic and the manual matching, run that process, and then you're going to dump that out into Excel. So that way you'll have that as kind of your backup for your R&I balance, right? So have your unmatched being the residual there. You're going to want to run the multi-currency revaluation entries. So that's for any invoices that are sitting out there that are a different currency. It'll just do the translation at that time. So you may want to, we'll delve into dimensions a little bit here. So you may want to just consider your dimensional allocations. So, and really what I mean by that is on your journal entries, anything where so what some people do is come year end, they're going to do a download of maybe their trial balance by dimension, and they're just going to make sure that all the rules they meant to be followed are followed. For example, make sure like all your expense accounts all have a department, for example, and just make sure nothing got in there that was blank, or that nothing ended up in the wrong place. So just from various, even if you have controls set up for that, there's various ways that users can put in the data where it might not have those fields. So it's just a good time to check through that. And just a couple notes as well on that. So you can change the journal, as a journal is in temporary status, of course you can change all that. However, there's also a parameter that exists that allows you to do that. So after journals are finalized, you can still change the dimensions on some of them if you have that parameter selected, as well as even after your year is closed. Just kind of heads up on that though, whether you use that parameter or not. Some people are just a little concerned because it doesn't have any audit trail on there. So just kind of so nothing's really, so what you're not able to change is the posting date, the GL accounts, or the amount. This is only, specific to the dimensions themselves. All right, so finally, the next thing you're going to want to do, or not finally, but the next thing you're going to want to do is take any of your simulated journal entries that exist out there and clean those up, which means, either delete them or make them actual. So X3 won't let you move forward if you have a bunch of, or any simulated entries that are sitting out there. Okay, so now we're going to talk about fixed assets. So for those of you that are using the fixed asset module, just a couple things to consider here. So you want to confirm that all of your periods are set to actual on the depreciation context screen, not simulated. And the default is simulated, so just be careful of that. You want to confirm that all of your journals are posted for the year. And then you want to check the context monitor and make sure that that it is green, right, rather than red. If it's red, that indicates that there's an issue that needs to be addressed. Like an example of that would be if you disposed of an asset and didn't post that entry, you just need to do that before you can move forward. So once you've cleared all those errors out and posted all of your transactions for fixed assets as actuals, just a heads up on that. So you can post your simulated entries to the GL. So just be careful that doesn't happen. I can't stress that enough. Once you are confident that your fixed assets are correct, they're making it to your GL as they should, and they're no longer in simulated, so all is well, you can then go ahead and close your fixed asset module. So a couple words of warning here that are up on the screen. Once that is closed, just be careful because your fixed asset is its own separate module, right? So kind of unique in the X3 world. So once it is closed, it behaves differently than your general ledger. You cannot reopen that again. Okay, so just make sure you're okay. So of course, then you're kind of scrambling and needing to fix things via manual journals and what have you. And then last thing here with the fixed assets is that you must have that module closed before your GL can close. All right, so one more thing to do on your list here is to reconcile your bank accounts. Again, probably not new for any of you. So you want to make sure that your cash accounts are all tied out to the bank and that everything is flowing smoothly there. Okay, so this screen is just showing you a couple of options that you guys have in the close process to help you guys keep your sanity, I guess, for lack of a better word. So what you may find happens if you have multiple people with access to your system is you might have cleared out one area and thought that it was taken care of from the month end or year end perspective, and then you come to find out that somebody has posted a purchase invoice to a date that you had to the wrong date and backdated it after you had already kind of written that off as a closed area. So there's the parameters available to you within X3 that will prevent that from happening. So they're up on the screen here. So you're going to need to go into Setup, General Parameters, Parameter Value, and then within this chapter of TC that I'm hovering my mouse over here, that's the chapter you're going to select, the group of CLO, and then these are just some parameters available to you. So those that start with the XXXs on here are because those are just placeholders because you can be both a start date or an end date, and they're just indicated with the STR or an END. So your purchase invoices are the ACH, your journal and batch are CPT, etc. So that is one way that you can lock your system down when you haven't yet closed it and don't want people to post to it. A couple other tools in your tool bag to that end is you can restrict additional postings by the document type. So you can go into Setup, Financials, Document Types, and in there's a validity date that you can select. So you can set that for 1/1/19 should you so choose. And yet another way is the journal code. So you can, where you can deactivate those, or there's an access code in there as well. So as you can see, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. Of course, you could just run your trial balance, your GL detail, and just look for things with that were have an entered date, after the date where you cleared those areas, but before it was posted. So those fields are available to you in X3. The out-of-the-box Crystal report for your GL detail doesn't have the date something was entered or the user for that matter, but those are fields that can be added relatively easily. So if you guys don't have those, that's something that would be useful to you. If you're not terribly savvy in Crystal, you can certainly reach out to us. That's not a terribly time-consuming addition to make to those reports, and a lot of people really find that useful. So the implication there is knowing who put a journal in is terribly useful, as well as when that was entered. So not just the accounting date, but the date entered. Okay. So we'll kind of get into some managerial reports that you're going to want to run at month end here, or I'm sorry, year end rather. So I have some report codes up here. If you guys are familiar with those, so this is just the code you look it up in. If you don't know the bucket that report is in, you can just go to reports, and search on NA, BP, ATB for your customer aging. That's also the same code for your supplier aging, so you're going to want to run those. And that's just a parameter on that specific report where you select whether it's customer or supplier. Of course, you're going to want to run your trial balance as well. All right, so then we're going to kind of get into a couple things that we have. We've made enhancements that are available to you guys should you want them. So we have a requester that exists for the matching detail for your R&I account. It's called ACH040. So depending on when and who did your implementation, you guys may have that available to you already. If not, just reach out to one of your consultants and we can add that to your system. And again, that's not terribly time consuming or difficult or anything like that. And that'll be available to you. This is a requester that exists that as long as you're not doing partial receipts, it's going to be, it'll help tie out, right? So as long as you receive an invoice in full, this will work. So with the R&I, there's just kind of some oddities with some of the reports that exist in there, and the flags that get switched during that process. So there's also a fixed asset listing that we have. So again, RKL has a report that a lot of our clients find a little bit more useful than the out-of-the-box one. So it has book value on there, your fixed asset totals, accumulated depreciation totals, your net book value, and all that ties to trial balance. So if that's something that's useful to you, again, reach out and we can help you guys with that. So the next one is your stock valuation report. And this is one that you want to run pretty much right when the ball drops at New Year's is usually when people want to run this, assuming that's your fiscal year end. However, most people are, kind of busy at that time and not really looking to run reports. So that's a requester that can be set up as well. And that's how a lot of people handle that. So they'll have a stock valuation report run at, literally like, 12:01 on, January 1st. So again, if that's something that you're interested in, that's something we can help you guys out with in relatively short order. All right, so next we have a WIP requester. And again, this is an RKL custom one that we have that's kind of improves upon, those that people have had problems with before. So it's called ZWIP. So again, same thing I mentioned before about the ACH 040. It might be a requester that's already on your system. If not, or if you're not sure how to look, then certainly reach out to us. So it provides the work order detail of what's in the WIP account that ties to the WIP on your GL. All right, so it's a reconciliation report. Really, it's not set up to be. Or I'm sorry, it's not set up to be an inventory report. So just heads up on that. Okay, so now we're going to kind of get into, once all that pre-work has been done, we're going to get into actually like the process of closing your periods and years, right? All right, so there's a few final reports or things that you need to execute before. So if you want to close your period on this, hang on one second here. All right, so to close your period, you're going to want to run your final your final period of the year. You're going to want to run a final validation for all of your temporary entries for 2018. So again, there's the function up on that screen for you. Excuse me. You also want to review your pre-closing report. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's your Klopper report. So if you're not running that on a monthly basis, that's something that's useful. And basically what that does is if you go to close a period, any errors that would show up when you close the period, they just show up on the Klopper report before. So it's basically just a preview of what errors you would have if you were to try to close the period at that moment in time. All right. All right, so the next thing you're going to want to do is just close your stock period, right? And then finally just close your period. So it being the final month of the year, it's going to tell you that is the case, that this is the final month of the year. A couple things to note that I probably should have mentioned earlier. Before you close your final period, make sure that both the year 2019 and the period of January at the very least, if not all of them, which is what most people end up doing, is open all their future periods. Just make sure those are open. If not, that'll kind of cause you some problems down the road. All right, so on to our next slide here. So when it is finally time to execute closing your year, there's a couple things you want to make sure of. Again, some of these are processes or procedures you probably want to make sure are followed during the month end as well, but certainly during year end. You want to make sure that all of your users are logged out of EM. Go ahead and turn off your accounting tab. And then there's a couple things just to check that should be in place, but it's probably a good idea just to check them anyway. One of them is that you want to make sure that you have a journal, the NEWPR journal and document type created. So those should exist, unless you have an old system and haven't, but in which case if you close the year, you probably had to put those in there. But like I said, just something worth checking. And if assuming those are there, then great. You also want to check the parameters for both your analytical and your general ledger carry forward. Make sure those are set to yes. And these are the values for those parameters. Okay. The other thing that you want to do is just make sure that on your chart of accounts, you also want to check out your miscellaneous accounts tab on there. Make sure and again, this probably applies more to people closing the year for the first time. Make sure that your line 11 is your retained earnings account. And in addition to that, you just want to make sure that all your other lines have values in them, or just you may run into errors that will be generated, even if they're accounts that aren't used, just because EM is going to look for those to be filled in. So just heads up on that. And again, if you run into errors, that's certainly something that we can help you guys with. All right, so now we're going to get into how we actually execute the year-end close. So you're going to go under financials, closing process, fiscal year close. then you're going to get this pop-up screen to come up that is on the slide here. Make sure that you have the correct company selected. Make sure that you have all ledgers should be set to no. And you're just going to close your legal ledger for now. This fiscal year, so I got an old screenshot of this. So this new fiscal year will say 2019 this time. And then you're going to want to tab through and just, again, make sure those NEW PRs that we mentioned a slide ago, make sure those exist and that, all is well with those. You may want to run the simulation. We'll kind of talk about that in a minute here. So once you run this process, if you run it, the final one, there's going to be two journals that are created. So one that's going to roll your current year into your retained earnings, and the next is going to carry forward your GL balances, right? So just a side note here, again, on your setup, and again, this is just something that maybe you should check ahead of time, just make sure that everything is as you want it to be. So within the account class function, that's where the carry forward is defined. So that's an area where, depending on how granular you are, so at the least granular level, you're going to have any account that starts with the 1 as your asset. And within that accounting class function, you just want to make sure that the carry forward is selected to yes. All right. And the dimensions have a similar thing that's handled at the dimension type, just on which ones are carried forward. So if you've done that before and your dimensions got goofy or something, that might just be something that you need to check, or again have your get your consultant on a meeting and just make sure they're looking at it and everything seems good on that. All right, so again, you can run the simulation, and we'll just talk about what that means for a second. So if you aren't ready to close the year is a good example for this, but you want to have a lot of your reports to be populated correctly, you at least need to run the simulation, and that'll just carry forward a simulated entry that your reports that a lot of the out-of-the-box reports from Sage are set to pick up. So like trial balance, for example, things like that. So that is one option that people often do. And let's see here. So the other thing as well is when these journals do post, like I said, there's two different entries. There's one to close everything out and one to carry everything forward. So it's advised that you leave the carry forward one in 2019 open, just in case you need to reopen the period. So you may not want to, and I'm sorry, I meant to say that leave that journal as a temporary status. So it just makes your life easier should you need to reopen the period. Okay, I think that's it for that area. All right, so we're going to just talk about a couple of reporting considerations next. All right, so you're going to want to just verify your trial balances using either the financial data extractor or SEI, and just verify your balances, make sure everything's as you're expecting them to be. Confirm that your roll forward of your ending balances and beginning balances are working right. All right, so there's a couple ways to do that. So again, I'm assuming most people have kind of moved out of the financial data extraction world and into some kind of reporting tool, but that whether you have or not, you can do it either way. So either with SEI or financial data extraction. Okay, so now we're going to kind of get into the other considerations. So again, most of this is just really maintenance. So theoretically, we have a closed year at this point. So in terms of your budget, so if you guys do use the budgeting features of the next three, in the new year, you guys can create new budget codes should you want, or you can import into existing codes, or you can create a new version. But if you use the same budget codes, then your SEI reports are going to still work, right? So that's something that we'd probably recommend that you do. But again, with your specific needs, that might be something you just want to talk about with, with your consultant. So if you do use the operational budget, you're going to need to calculate those so that you carry those forward in 2019 where that's appropriate. So a couple other things to talk about then. So if you do use the sales or purchasing price list, now is a good time of year to update those. So just a couple heads up on that. So depending on how you have them set up when you originally put them in, some people set the validity date to end at year end if you're expecting new pricing. So if that's the case, just make sure that you don't have a lag there of a period without a price list in, or probably a good practice is have that date set out in the future just so you have something in place until you get the updated price in there. but that's something that you can do via an import, both on the purchasing and the sales price list perspective. Nextly, we're going to talk about a standard cost. So if you leave everything as is, the system is going to use 2018 standard cost until you create 2019 ones. So we'll kind of just walk through what we find to be the best practice here to handle rolling your creating your new standard cost in the next year. So what you're going to want to do is just copy your current raw materials standard cost into the 2019 simulated. Then you can export that out into Excel, make whatever changes you can as appropriate if you're going to be changing your standards. Then just re-import that back in the simulated. Then you're going to do a 2019 BOM roll-up, and then you can validate that. And then you can take that simulated 2019 standard cost values, and you can just promote those up to your actual standard cost. So that's relatively, we found to be the most straightforward way to do that. And again, if you need a little bit of help on that, just feel free to reach out. That's something we can probably handle with a quick meeting with you guys, get you comfortable with that. All right, so just kind of approaching the end here. So a couple more things we want to talk about here. We're going to talk about 1099s briefly. All right, so under the declarations is where you, under 1099, so you're going to go into the fee declaration, and I kind of have on the screen here, I have the path there. So you can go to declarations, fee generation, 1099 generation. So just, again, remember that you had to set up your suppliers either as 1099 or, depending on your version of X3, it might be called DAS2, D-A-S, which is just the European equivalent of 1099 for those of you that ever wondered what the heck that is. Just make sure that, that box needed to be checked ahead of time. But, if that's not the case, don't worry, all hope isn't lost. Within this, there's a payment summary within this function that will allow you to edit various invoices or change the amounts. So there is an amount in here where you can change what the 1099 amount is for various invoices. So you can make edits to what you originally put in there should you so need to. All right, so after you do that and make sure everything's all good, you're going to run the calculate 1099 payments function. Then within, should you so need to, there are forms that are available. They just sell at any office supply store. So right now there isn't a form within X3 that I'm aware of where it'll print your 1099. So you just need to, they'll print a white paper. You just need to input the form that you buy at the office supply store, and it'll print out, just fine. Should it not, it's just, if those of you that have had the pleasure of playing around with Crystal Reports, it's just probably a matter of moving fields if something's out of whack or something not aligned properly. Again, that's not a terribly laborious task to tweak that. So if you have any issues with there when you do your test run, if they're not lined up correctly, just reach out and we'll help you. And as far as I know, there isn't any electronic filing within X3. However, you can buy third-party products that will help you with that. So I know some of you might have requirements to file electronically. So if you guys need more information on that, feel free to reach out. We can connect you with some way to get that handled electronically. Okay. One last thing we want to talk about here is, come year end, there are some places within X3 with some default date parameters. So these are the default dates that populate within EM when you run a report or view an inquiry. So they're in the SUP supervisor chapter. Whoops, sorry. And then the DEF group in here. So this is where you can put in your various start dates and end dates to populate them to 2019. One word of warning in here is that you need to make sure that this END DAT field, make sure that this is a year that this is at least 1 year out in the future. So this is basically when X3 will stop letting you post transactions. So it's pretty important that you have that straight, so that you can have, so that you don't run into any weird problems. So it's kind of one of those, a magic button that if it's not set correctly, it can cause you, a lot of heartache when it's really just pretty straightforward and quick to fix. So year end's a good time. Just make sure you didn't goof up and have that, too close to now, meaning, you didn't want to end in 2018. So, there's probably no harm in setting that out, 4 or 5 years out in the future, or 2099 for that matter. But that's, really a matter of opinion. Okay, so a couple more things to talk about. So your fiscal years don't need to be closed immediately. It's kind of, as we talked about. So in fact, a lot of people leave them open just until the end of their audit. So that's really a matter of opinion, when you guys execute that. Again, they can be reopened without too much heartache, but, they may be left open until, a couple months or however long you deem appropriate. And again, just kind of as I mentioned before, if you do run that simulated year end at the very least, that'll update your beginning balances for your reports and all that. You just want to make sure that you have the FYE flag included for your analysis purposes, right? So an example is found in the criteria screen of the account balance inquiry. Okay, so that was all I wanted to cover in today's session. So we do have some, should you guys have any questions, and if you want to send a general question to support, I have an email address here for your support, our support email address, as well as our account managers both on the East Coast and the West Coast, which are Gia Lane and Mike Scher respectively.